The window shattered at 2:47 in the afternoon on a Tuesday that nobody in Harlan County, Nevada would ever entirely forget. But that part comes later. At 2:31, Cole Ryder pulled his Harley off the interstate and coasted toward pump number 1 at a gas station that had been losing its argument with the desert for about 15 years. Two pumps, a sun-bleached awning that had been surrendering to the wind one frayed edge at a time, a hand-painted sign advertising coffee and bait that nobody had bothered to update since the bait shop closed. The kind of place you stopped at because your tank was empty and your options were gone, not because you wanted to be there. He swung off the bike and stood for a moment with both hands pressed against his lower back, working out the compression that came with 300 miles of interstate. 51 years old. He could feel every one of those miles in his spine now, and that was new, and it was the kind of new he didn't enjoy thinking about. He pulled off his helmet, salt and pepper hair, a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in 4 days, a face that had been assembled over the course of 5 decades from hard decisions and worse weather. His cut-the-worn leather vest of the Iron Compass MC Mojave chapter carried patches that told a story he rarely explained to anyone. 3 years prospecting, 11 years riding, a road captain patch he'd earned by making the right call 3 times in a row when the wrong call would have been considerably easier. He fed his card into the pump reader, and while the numbers started rolling, he looked at the parking lot. He always looked at every parking lot. Not suspicious exactly, not paranoid, just awake in a way that 16 years of riding had made permanent the specific alertness of a man who had learned that the difference between a problem and a catastrophe was usually the 30 seconds you spent paying attention before either one arrived. There were 7 vehicles, a minivan with Colorado plates, engine running, air conditioning cranked to maximum, a pickup with 2 cattle dogs panning in the bed, a sedan with a crack running the full width of the windshield, 3 other vehicles arranged at various pumps, and a white SUV parked in the side lot maybe 40 feet from the nearest pump. Engine off. Cole's eyes came back to the SUV and stayed there. It was July in Nevada. The digital thermometer on the gas station signboard read 103 degrees. The white SUV had been sitting in direct sun long enough that the paint above the hood was throwing heat shimmer in slow wavering columns. All 4 windows were closed. Through the dark tinting on the rear passenger side, there was a shape, small, still. He replaced the pump nozzle, pulled his card, walked toward the SUV. Not running, not broadcasting alarm, just walking the way he walked everywhere, with the unhurried certainty of a man who had learned that panic rarely helped, and observation almost always did. He got close enough to see through the tinting. A boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, sitting in a car seat, head lolling to one side, mouth slightly open. The way kids looked when they fell asleep in cars, sure. But also the way kids looked when heat exhaustion had crossed over into something more serious. The boy's face was flushed, deeply wrongly flushed, the kind of red that had nothing to do with sunburn. There was no visible motion from the chest that Cole could detect from this distance. That absence hit him somewhere behind his sternum, like a cold fist closing. He tried the door handle, locked. He tried the other rear door, locked. He knocked on the glass hard, the knock of a man who meant it. Nothing. By now, a few people at the pumps had noticed. A woman in a sun hat had stopped walking. A man in a polo shirt had turned from his truck to watch. A teenager with a phone already raised was filming, and Cole felt something move through him at that sight, not quite anger, more like a profound and exhausted disappointment in the species. "That your vehicle?" the polo shirt man called across the lot. Cole ignored him. He knocked again harder. "You can't just break into someone's car," the polo shirt man said closer now, carrying the specific confidence of a person who had never had to make a real decision in his life. Cole straightened up and looked at him. Just looked at him. The man took a step back without quite understanding why. "Somebody call 911, Cole said. Not asked. Said. "I already called." The woman in the sun hat, Her voice was shaking. They said 8 to 12 minutes. Cole looked back at the boy in the car. 8 to 12 minutes. He knew what happened to children in locked cars at 103 degrees. He knew that the internal temperature of a sealed vehicle could reach 130 within 20 minutes. He knew what that did to a 6-year-old's core temperature. He had read it somewhere years ago, and the information had lodged itself in him the way certain facts did quietly in the dark, waiting for the moment they became necessary. He walked back to his bike. "See," the polo shirt man said behind him. "He's leaving. Smart. Not your problem." Cole opened his saddlebag and took out the tire iron he kept for roadside emergencies. He walked back to the SUV. "Hey, you can't." He swung. The rear passenger window took one hit and spiderwebbed. The second hit knocked it through. Safety glass, so it came apart in chunks rather than shards falling inward and outward in a rough cascade. Cole reached through and unlocked the door before the echo of the impact had finished moving across the parking lot. Then he had the door open and his hands were on the boy, and the heat that poured out of the interior of that SUV hit him like opening an industrial oven. It was extraordinary. It was brutal. The air inside was thick and almost solid with heat, the kind that dried your eyes in the first second of exposure, and the child inside it had been breathing that air, sitting in that air, while 23 adults stood 30 feet away in the shade, arguing about liability and recording video. The boy was limp. Not unconscious, Cole could see the flutter of eyelids, but deeply past the point where his body could regulate itself. His face had that papery, heat-scorched quality that didn't belong on a child's face. His breathing was rapid and shallow, more panting than breathing each exhale too fast and too thin. Cole got one arm under his back and one under his knees and lifted him out. The boy made a sound then, something between a whimper and a breath, thin and dry as paper catching light. And that sound did something to Cole's chest that he wasn't expecting, something that moved too fast to name, and that he filed away for later because later was the only place he could afford to put it right now. "Get water," he said, to anyone, to the parking lot. Someone put a cold water bottle in his hand within 5 seconds. He didn't check who. He crouched down with the boy on the asphalt beside the SUV, cradling him with one arm and pressing the cold bottle against the side of his neck, then his forehead, talking low and steady while he did it. The same voice he used when a younger rider was down and scared. "You're okay. I got you. You're outside now. It's going to get better." The boy's eyes opened, brown eyes, deep brown glazed with heat and confusion, searching Cole's face with the desperate trust that children had when they had no other option, when a stranger was all that stood between them and the thing they couldn't name. "Hot," the boy breathed. "I know," Cole said. "I know it was. It's going to get better now." Around him, the parking lot had become a theater. The teenager was still filming. The polo shirt man had gone quiet. The woman in the sun hat was crying. Someone else had run inside the gas station and was coming back with a bag of ice from the cooler. Cole held out his free hand without looking up and took it and pressed the bag against the boy's legs, his arms the back of his neck. The ambulance arrived in 6 minutes, not 8 to 12. 6. Cole noted that with grim gratitude. By the time the paramedics took over, the boy's color was starting to come back. Still not right. Still needed a hospital fluids monitoring. But the worst of the heat crisis was easing from his face, and his eyes were clearer, and when the paramedics asked his name, the boy said it in a small, hoarse voice. "Jamie. Jamie Parker." He said it like he was checking to make sure he still knew it, like the name was a tether he needed to confirm was still holding. A woman came running across the parking lot, then screaming his name. She'd been inside the station. 15 minutes, she kept saying, sobbing. She'd only been inside 15 minutes. She thought the air conditioning was still running. She thought it would be fine. She hadn't known. She was trying to reach the paramedics, and they were gently but firmly managing her. And then she looked across the stretcher and saw Cole standing there with the tire iron and the broken window behind him, and her face went through 5 different expressions in 3 seconds. None of them settled into anything he could read clearly. He didn't try. That wasn't his job here. He put the tire iron back in his saddlebag, got on his bike, and left before the first police car arrived. He was 30 miles down the highway before he pulled over. Not because of the cops. He had broken a window to save a child's life. If they wanted to charge him with something, let them find him. He pulled over because his hands were still shaking, and he didn't trust the shaking on the bike at speed. He sat on the shoulder with the engine off, and the Nevada desert spread out in every direction, flat and enormous and indifferent. He breathed, just breathed, felt the heat through his jacket, listened to the distant sound of a truck on the interstate a quarter-mile east, watched a hawk trace a long, patient arc across the white sky and disappear into the distance. Jamie Parker. The boy had said it like he was checking, like the name was a tether and he needed to know it was still attached. Cole didn't know why that name stayed in him the way it stayed, like a stone dropped into still water, still sending rings outward long after the stone had settled. He started the bike and rode south. The story broke overnight the way these things broke in the current age, fast, chaotic, and with complete disregard for accuracy. The footage the teenager had shot was 47 seconds long. It showed Cole approaching the SUV, the window breaking the retrieval. It showed nothing of the 7 minutes before that when Cole had been assessing the situation, trying the doors, knocking on the glass. It showed nothing of the other 23 adults who had been standing in the shade doing nothing. The caption the kid had written was, "Biker destroys SUV at gas station hero or criminal." And the algorithm did what algorithms did. By midnight, it had 340,000 views. By morning, it had crossed 2 million, and the comments section had divided itself into the predictable camps with predictable ferocity. People calling him a hero. People calling him a reckless vigilante. A smaller and angrier contingent who focused specifically on the motorcycle club cut he was wearing and drew the conclusions that certain people always drew from that detail, conclusions that required no evidence and no thought and arrived pre-assembled. Cole knew about none of this. He didn't own a smartphone. He had a flip phone for calls and a desktop computer at the chapter warehouse that he turned on roughly twice a week. He found out the next morning when a prospect named Devlin knocked on his door at 7 in the morning, holding his own phone out like evidence. "You're everywhere," Devlin said. Cole looked at the screen for about 4 seconds. Then he handed the phone back. "Make coffee," he said, and went to brush his teeth. The Iron Compass, MC Mojave. Chapter operated out of a converted warehouse on the south edge of Ridgeline, Nevada, a town of 11,000 that survived mostly on mining industry support work and the stubborn refusal of people who had decided to stay. The warehouse had a garage on the ground floor where they did legitimate mechanical work, a common room above it with a pool table that was slightly warped, and 4 mismatched couches and 12 private rooms that ranged in quality from decent to storage closet, with a cot depending on when you'd patched in and how much time had passed since. Cole had been here 11 years. He had one of the decent rooms, a workbench in the garage with his name on a piece of electrical tape above it, and a reputation in the chapter as the man who thought before he acted, which he took seriously, and as the man who never under any circumstances asked for help, which was a reputation he was somewhat less proud of. The chapter president, a man named Strick, found him in the garage at 8 that morning. Strick was 56 years old, built like a piece of heavy machinery that had been running outdoors through multiple Nevada winters and had formed strong opinions about weather in the process. He had the quality of stillness that very large men sometimes develop the ability to occupy a significant amount of space without broadcasting anything at all. He had been running the chapter for 9 years. He'd patched in the same year as Cole, and they had been road brothers through things Cole didn't have adequate vocabulary for yet. Strick stood in the garage doorway with his coffee mug and looked at Cole working on a transmission. "You didn't tell me," Strick said. "Nothing to tell," Cole said without looking up. "Kid's alive." "Good." A pause. Strick came in and sat on an overturned oil drum that had served as an informal stool for as long as Cole had been there. "Her mother called the station," Strick said. "Then she called around. Someone pointed her here. She wants to thank you." Cole went back to the transmission. Tell her she's welcome. She asked if you'd come to the hospital. The wrench he was using slipped. He steadied it. No, he said, flat, final. I don't do hospitals. He said it the way he said things that required no further discussion. Not because he was angry, but because certain doors were closed and he didn't explain the doors. Strick knew about the doors. He'd learned about them over 11 years of riding beside a man who never opened them voluntarily. He didn't push. He finished his coffee. The kid's asking for the man with the bike, Strick said, standing to leave. Just so you know. He left. Cole sat with the transmission for a long time after that. He went to the hospital 3 days later. He couldn't have told you exactly why he changed his mind. He'd spent 2 days not thinking about it, and 1 day thinking about nothing else, which was usually how his decisions got made. The mechanics of it worked on him slowly the way cold worked into metal, gradually without permission, until the change was already complete before you noticed it happening. There was something specific he kept returning to. Not the fear in the boy's eyes, not the confusion. The moment after when the worst was over and Jamie had looked up at him from the asphalt with that expression that Cole recognized, even though he had never seen it directed at himself. The expression of someone who has been utterly convinced they are alone in the world and has just found out against all available evidence that they are not. Cole didn't know what to do with that. So he went to the hospital. He brought a toy motorcycle he'd found at a gas station gift shop. Small, plastic, yellow. He was aware it was a ridiculous gift, and he brought it anyway because it was the only thing in that display case that made any sense to him. The room was a pediatric recovery room with a cheerful animal mural running the length of one wall, and the particular smell of hospitals that Cole had been deliberately avoiding for 6 years since his last surgery, since the last time he had been the person in the bed. He stood in the doorway for a moment and breathed through it. The woman in the room looked up. She was younger than he'd expected, early 30s maybe. Dark circles under brown eyes that matched her son's. Her hair was in a loose ponytail that had been neat at some point yesterday and had given up sometime after midnight. She was still in the same clothes she'd been wearing at the gas station, or at least she looked like someone who hadn't left the building since. Nora Parker. That was her name. He'd been told it and had filed it and was now seeing the woman the name belonged to for the first time, really seeing her not across a parking lot stretcher with 5 expressions warring across her face, but here in this room in the exhausted stillness of someone who has been afraid for 72 hours straight and is still holding herself together through sheer commitment to doing so. Jamie was sitting up in bed with color restored to his face, an IV taped to his small arm, watching a cartoon on the ceiling-mounted television with the boneless ease of a child who has been reassured enough times that the fear has finally retreated to a manageable distance. He turned when Cole appeared in the doorway. The recognition was immediate and total. "Motorcycle man," Jamie said. Nora stood. Her face did the complicated thing 5 expressions in 3 seconds, and Cole understood it better now than he had in the parking lot. She didn't know whether to be grateful or afraid or both simultaneously. She'd probably been turning that question over in her mind since the SUV window shattered with no clean answer available in any direction. "Mr. Ryder," she said, voice steady. He could see what it cost her to keep it that way. "Cole," he said. A pause. "Nora." He held up the toy motorcycle. "Yellow," he said. "For him." Jamie's face did something then that Cole was completely unprepared for. It lit up the way a child's face lit up, which was so total and undefended that adults forgot it was possible until they saw it again. The boy held out both hands and said, "Can I see?" in a voice that made clear he was already certain the answer was yes. Cole crossed the room and gave it to him. He stood there while Jamie turned the toy over in his small hands, making quiet engine sounds under his breath, and Nora watched from across the bed, and none of them said anything for a while. And somehow in that silence, the shape of the situation began to shift into something slightly different from what it had been when he walked in. He came back the next day. He didn't plan to. He told himself he'd delivered the toy he'd seen the kid was okay, obligation met. But he was passing through that part of town, and the hospital was 2 blocks off his route, and it wasn't a decision so much as a direction his bike took without his full participation. Jamie was awake and sitting up in bed with a sketchbook open on his lap. Nora was not in the room. Cole found out later she was in the hospital cafeteria getting what appeared to be her first real meal since the parking lot. The nursing staff had cleared Cole as a visitor by then, and the nurse who passed him in the hallway just nodded. He stood in the doorway. "Hey," he said. "Hey," Jamie said and went back to drawing. Cole came in and sat in the chair beside the bed and looked at what the boy was drawing. It was a motorcycle. A good one, actually. Remarkable for a 6-year-old. The proportions were accurate in a way that suggested these weren't practice drawings, but drawings made from genuine understanding. The sense of forward motion was there. The rider was a solid shape rather than a stick figure. The perspective on the front wheel was wrong in exactly the way a child's perspective was wrong, not carelessly, but earnestly trying harder than the skill currently allowed. "You draw a lot," Cole asked. "Every day," Jamie said. "You're good at it." Jamie considered this with the seriousness he seemed to bring to everything. "I practice," he said. Cole nodded. Fair answer. "My dad had a motorcycle," Jamie said then. Cole looked at him. "He told me about it." The boy continued, still drawing coloring in a detail on the fuel tank with short, determined strokes. "He didn't have it anymore, but he used to. He said it made him feel like flying." Cole looked at the drawing. "Yeah," he said. "It does." Jamie kept coloring. "Dad died," he said. He said it the way children said the hardest things directly, without armor, without the elaborate scaffolding that adults constructed around words like that. Just as a fact that existed in the world alongside other facts. "Before I was big, I don't remember him too good, but I remember the motorcycle thing." Cole sat with that for a moment. Let it settle. "What was his name?" he asked. "Michael," Jamie said. "Michael Parker." He paused, added one more stroke of blue to the fairing. "Mom says I have his eyes." Cole looked at the boy's eyes. Brown, deep brown, the shade of dark wood in winter light. Something moved in him. He couldn't name it. He filed it and moved on. "Can I see your other drawings?" he asked. Jamie handed over the sketchbook without hesitation, which was its own kind of thing. That instinctive trust, the way the boy handed over something personal to a man he'd known for 3 days, a large stranger in leather who carried engine grease under his nails and had a face that had unsettled grown men. The sketchbook went across the bed railing as naturally as if they'd been doing this for years. Cole turned the pages slowly. Motorcycles page after page. Different angles, different styles. Some clearly copied from photographs, some drawn entirely from imagination. A few had riders. A few had short captions in careful, oversized first-grade handwriting, the letters big and deliberate the way you wrote when you were still learning that letters had rules. One caption said simply fast. One caption said loud is good. And then near the middle of the book, one caption that stopped Cole's hand mid-turn. 2 words, written with the particular combination of certainty and uncertainty that only existed in childhood. Dad, maybe. Cole looked at the drawing beside it. A motorcycle on a highway. Rider leaning forward into the wind, into the distance. The road ahead long and straight and going somewhere the drawing couldn't quite contain. The certainty and the uncertainty of those 2 words sat on Cole's chest like a physical weight. The period after Dad. The maybe after the period. The way a 6-year-old tried to hold the shape of someone he barely remembered by drawing what he'd been told that person loved. He handed the sketchbook back. Nora came in from the cafeteria a few minutes later with coffee and a sandwich and stopped short when she saw Cole in the chair beside her son's bed. Not alarmed exactly, recalibrating. "He was showing me his drawings," Cole said. She looked at Jamie, then at Cole. "He draws motorcycles," she said, with an inflection that lived somewhere between exhaustion and something more complicated, something that had been behind her eyes longer than the last 3 days. "I noticed," Cole said. She sat down. She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup the way people did when they needed something solid to hold. "You can go," she said then. "I mean, I'm not asking you to. I'm just saying you don't have to stay." I'm not here because I have to be, Cole said. She looked at him. Then why are you here? It was a direct question. He appreciated direct questions. He sat with it for a moment because it deserved a real answer and not a deflection. I don't know yet, he said. She looked at him for another long moment, and then something in her face shifted just slightly, the way a door opened an inch before anyone decided whether to open it further. Okay, she said, and the word landed with enough weight that they both understood it wasn't entirely okay, and that was also okay. He came back 3 more times before Jamie was discharged. Each visit had the quality of something being assembled without a blueprint. Each one slightly more natural than the last. The silence is getting more comfortable. The conversations getting longer without either of them deciding to make that happen. Cole answered Jamie's questions about motorcycles with complete seriousness because the questions were serious. What kind of engine? How many cylinders? How loud could it really go that fast? Or was that just what people said? Nora talked with the efficiency of someone who had learned not to waste words. She mentioned the insurance process, which was a nightmare. 2 jobs which she could not afford to take time off from. A neighbor who'd offered to watch Jamie but about whom she had concerns she didn't fully articulate. Cole listened with the attention of someone who had learned that most conversations required less input than people assumed. That real listening was its own form of response. On the day Jamie was discharged, Cole followed their car out of the hospital parking lot just to make sure it started, then watched it turn onto the main road and stood in the empty lot for a moment after it was gone. Ridgeline was a small enough town that he could find out where they lived without any particular effort. He told himself that was worth thinking about. Then he told himself it didn't have to be anything at all and went home. He drove past their street 3 days later. He told himself, checking on them. He was taking the long way home from a fuel run, and Carver Street happened to be on the long route. That was all. The house was a small bungalow, kept as neatly as a single working mother of a 6-year-old could manage, which was honestly pretty well. But there were things. A fence in the front with 2 boards missing and a lean that suggested the post was rotting at the base. Paint on the porch peeling in long strips that curled at the edges. And the gutters on the left side of the roof had pulled away from the fascia at one corner and were hanging at an angle that wouldn't survive the first hard rain of September. He drove past. He came back an hour later with a bag of tools. Nora answered the door in her work uniform, pale green polo name tag still pinned clearly, just home from a shift. She looked at the bag. She looked at him. The fence post is rotting, Cole said. She looked at the fence. She looked at him. Something moved through her expression that wasn't quite what he'd expected. I worked 2 jobs, she said. There was an edge in it, not anger exactly, but the defensiveness of someone who had been made to feel too many times that the state of her house was a verdict on her character, rather than a simple mathematics problem of hours versus money. I know, he said. I can't afford to hire anyone. I'm not charging you. A pause. I'm not a charity case, she said. No, Cole said. You're a person with a rotting fence post. I know how to fix fence posts. She looked at him for a long moment. Behind her, from somewhere deeper in the house, small feet were already moving toward the sound of voices. Jamie, she called. Come say hi. And then Jamie appeared at his mother's hip and looked up at Cole with a grin that arrived without any reservation whatsoever. You came back, Jamie said. I came to fix your fence, Cole said. Jamie considered this seriously. Can I help? Bring me a glass of water, Cole said, and you can hand me tools. Jamie disappeared at a run. Nora stepped onto the porch and crossed her arms and looked at the fence with the expression of a woman who had been looking at that fence for longer than she wanted to admit, cataloging what she couldn't fix. You don't have to do this, she said. I know, he said. Then why? Because it needs doing, he said. And I know how. She didn't say anything else. After a moment, she went inside. Cole went to work on the fence. The fence took 2 hours. The gutters took another 45 minutes. Jamie handed him tools with great seriousness, learning their names as they went. the particular satisfaction of a 6-year-old who has been given real work to do and is doing it with full commitment. Auger, post-level, galvanized screws. He asked about the tools the same way he asked about motorcycles. Precise questions, real curiosity, no performance. Nora brought out iced tea at some point and sat on the porch steps and watched. And the quality of her watching the stillness she held, the way she kept the glass in both hands, told Cole she was still trying to find the right category for him and still not finding one that fit. That was fine. He'd made his peace a long time ago with not fitting into most categories. It was on his 9th day of coming around that he found the sketchbook. Not Jamie's hospital sketchbook. A different one, older, the cover worn soft at the corners, the pages slightly yielding with handling. It was on the coffee table in the living room, open to a specific page, left the way things got left when someone had been looking at them and had been called away before they were ready to put them down. The drawing on that page was not a child's drawing. The lines were steady and adult confident in a way that came from long practice, from hands that had drawn seriously for years. It showed a highway stretching to a horizon. On the shoulder of that highway was a car. Beside the car, a figure. And in the arms of that figure, another figure smaller, or maybe not smaller, just somehow more contained. Around both of them, the artist had somehow conveyed cold. He could feel it coming off the page, even in pencil lines. The winter dark pressing in from every edge of the paper. Jamie came in from the kitchen. "That's Dad's," he said without concern, the ease of a child reporting a familiar fact. "He drew that. Mom says he always kept it." Cole looked at the drawing. "What is it?" he asked. Jamie shrugged with the casualness of someone for whom the answer was less interesting than the next thing he was about to do. "I don't know. Mom says it's something that happened, something important." He picked up the sketchbook and carried it back to his room the way children carried things cleanly already on to the next thing, the previous thing fully released. Cole stayed where he was. He sat in the quiet of Nora Parker's living room, with the sounds of the kitchen coming from the next room and the late afternoon light coming through the windows at a long September angle. And he felt something press outward in him from a place he kept locked, a room in the back of his mind that he had constructed carefully over the course of 6 years and had not opened since. A highway, 2 figures, the cold. He had a memory he did not examine often. It lived in the locked room. He had put it there because taking it out had costs he couldn't always afford, and he had gotten very good at walking past the door without stopping. But he was not walking past it now. February, 6 years ago. Route 93, Nevada. 11 months of medication that hadn't worked the way it was supposed to. 3 months after that, when he hadn't worked the way he was supposed to. A chapter conflict that had hollowed out things he hadn't known were hollow. A surgery that had taken longer to heal from than anyone had predicted. And one night on the shoulder of the highway, in below freezing cold, with a decision sitting in front of him that he was not proud of, not then, not now, but that had been as real as the cold and the road and everything he had ever held in his hands. A car had stopped. Beat-up Honda. Cracked tail light throwing a fractured red glow across the asphalt. The man who got out was maybe 40, medium height. Nothing remarkable about him except that he had stopped when he didn't have to and had walked over when most people would have driven on. "Need any help?" And Cole had said no. The way you said no when you needed help more than you had ever needed anything in your life. And the man had said, "Okay," and then he had not left. He had leaned against the hood of his Honda and stayed, for 4 hours, in below freezing temperature, making conversation that wasn't really about anything about the road, about the cold, about a drive he had taken once through Utah that had surprised him with its beauty. The kind of conversation you had with someone you were keeping tethered while you figured out how to help them without making them feel like they needed helping. By the time something in the cold had shifted, and something in Cole had shifted with it, the man had made him eat something from a gas station bag in his back seat and had driven slowly behind Cole's truck for the first 15 miles to make sure he got home. "You going to be all right?" And Cole had said, yeah, and had meant it for the first time in months. The man had nodded, driven away. Cole had never gotten his last name. His first name had been Michael. Cole sat in Nora Parker's living room with the sounds of the kitchen coming from the next room and the locked room pressed outward hard against its hinges. The drawing, the highway, the two figures, the winter dark that pencil lines had somehow captured exactly right. Michael Parker. He turned the name over, looked at it from every angle available to him. He drove to the chapter warehouse that evening. He walked into Strick's office and sat down in the chair across from the desk and told him everything. Not in a rush, not with drama. The way Cole did everything, one thing at a time, with precision, trying to get the facts in order before the feelings could interfere. Strick listened without interrupting once. That was one of the things Cole valued most about the man, the ability to hear something through to the end without filling the space with himself. When Cole finished, Strick set his coffee mug down carefully on the desk. "You sure?" he said. "I need to see a photograph," Cole said. "But yes, I'm sure." Strick looked at him for a long time the way he looked at things that required more than a quick decision. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Cole looked at the wall behind Strick, the chapter photographs going back 20 years, faces of men who were still riding and faces of men who were gone. The weight of all those years in that room, the obligations, the history, the specific meaning of brotherhood, when brotherhood meant something real and not just something you wore on a patch. "I don't know yet," Cole said, "but I'm going back." "Yeah," Strick said, "I know." Outside the warehouse, the Nevada dark had settled over the desert, enormous and quiet and utterly indifferent to the things that happened inside it. Somewhere across town on Carver Street, in a small bungalow with a newly fixed fence and gutters that no longer hung at a dangerous angle, a 6-year-old boy was probably drawing motorcycles by lamplight, pressing hard with the colored pencil the way he pressed hard on everything, because he was the child of a man who had believed that nothing worth doing was worth doing halfway. And Cole Ryder drove home through the dark with a truth he hadn't fully found yet forming at the edges of what he already knew, and a debt he hadn't understood until tonight. And somewhere in the lock room of his mind, a highway and a cracked taillight, and a face he hadn't been able to fully remember, until a boy showed him a pencil drawing of a winter road and said simply, "That's Dad's." He didn't sleep that night. He lay on his back and looked at the ceiling and listened to the desert silence outside the warehouse walls and felt the quality of air that came before something changed. Not peaceful, not tense exactly, charged. The way the sky got charged before a storm came in from the west. He had owed a man his life for 6 years without knowing the man's name. And that man's son had looked up at him from a boiling car with brown eyes and said hot in a voice like dry paper. And the mathematics of it worked on him in the dark, whether he wanted it to or not. The shape of a single decision made on a winter highway, bending a line through 6 years of time and delivering it to a gas station parking lot at 2:31 on a July afternoon in exactly the right place. Dawn came slowly, Nevada slow. The desert lightning from black to blue to the burnt orange of a morning that had no interest in anyone's feelings. Cole got up, went to the garage, started working on an engine that didn't need working on because he needed his hands occupied while the rest of him caught up to what he already knew. Then he put the wrench down, walked upstairs, knocked on Strick's door. Strick opened it in a t-shirt coffee already in hand, as if he'd been expecting the knock for some time. "We have a family to take care of," Cole said. Strick looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded once in the way he nodded when something had settled into a place he'd already prepared for it. "Tell me everything," Strick said. And Cole did. The morning Strick walked into the common room and told the chapter what Cole had told him, the room went quiet in a specific way. Not the quiet of men who had nothing to say. The quiet of men processing something that required more than words to carry. There were 9 of them present. Strick stood at the head of the pool table with his coffee and his stillness, and laid it out the way Cole had laid it out to him, one thing at a time, without editorializing because the facts were sufficient on their own and didn't need decoration. A widow on Carver Street, a 6-year-old boy, a man named Michael Parker who had stopped on a winter highway when stopping cost him something real, who had stayed 4 hours in below freezing cold for a stranger he would never see again, and who had been dead long enough that his son was drawing motorcycles from memory, trying to hold the shape of a father he barely knew. And Cole, who had owed that man everything for 6 years without knowing where to put the debt. When Strick finished, no one spoke for a moment. Then a man named Hatch, 44 years old, former Army Corps of Engineers, hands the size of catcher's mitts, a man who communicated primarily through action and secondarily through understatement, said, "What does the roof need?" That was all. That was the whole thing. Not a vote. Not a speech about brotherhood or obligation or what the club stood for when it stood for something real. Just a man asking a practical question because the answer to the practical question was the only answer that mattered. Strick looked at Cole, who was sitting against the far wall with his arms crossed and his coffee going cold. "Shingles in 3 places," Cole said. "Left fascia pulling away. Gutters need reseating after." Hatch nodded. "Saturday," he said. That was Wednesday. Cole didn't tell Nora. He told himself he was going to. He had this conversation with himself on Thursday and again on Friday and arrived at Saturday morning having told her nothing. The reason which he was honest enough with himself to acknowledge was that he didn't know how to explain the chapter's involvement without explaining the debt, and explaining the debt meant explaining the highway, and explaining the highway meant opening the locked room. And the locked room had been locked for 6 years for reasons that still held weight. He pulled onto Carver Street at 7:15 Saturday morning with his truck and Hatch's truck behind him, and behind Hatch a van that belonged to a man named Terrence, who had done professional roofing for 12 years before his knees gave out, and who now did it as a personal favor to people who needed it. Behind Terrence's van, 3 more bikes, because some of them had come on bikes because that was how they moved through the world. The noise of 4 motorcycles and 2 trucks on a quiet residential street at 7:15 on a Saturday morning was considerable. Nora came to the front door in pajamas with her hair down and the expression of someone jolted out of sleep by something she couldn't immediately categorize as good or bad. She looked at the vehicles, at the men, at the ladders in the truck beds, at Cole standing on her porch. "What?" she said. It wasn't a question. "Roof," Cole said. She stared at him. "We'll be done by noon." "Cole." She said his name with the weight of someone who needed a person to actually hear them. "You can't just show up with Nora." He said her name the same way. "Let us fix the roof." She looked past him at the men unloading equipment with the efficient quiet of people who had learned that the best help was help that didn't make the recipient feel like a project. Hatch caught her eye and nodded once, not smiling, just acknowledging, and she seemed to read something in that nod that changed the quality of her breathing slightly. Jamie appeared at her hip, pajamas with small dinosaurs on them, hair pointing in at least 4 directions simultaneously. He looked at the assembled men and trucks and motorcycles with an expression of pure, uncomplicated delight. "Are those motorcycles?" he said. "Yeah," Cole said. "Can I?" "No," Cole said. "But when we're done with the roof, you can sit on mine. Not start it, just sit." Jamie weighed this offer with the seriousness of a negotiator who understood the difference between what he'd asked for and what he'd actually wanted. "Okay," he said with a magnanimity that suggested he'd gotten the better end of the deal. Nora looked at her son, then at Cole. The complicated expression was still doing its work, still moving through its calculations. But it had stopped bracing for impact, and that was something. "Coffee's inside," she said. Then she stepped back and let them in. The roof took until 1:30. It was not, as it turned out, just shingles in 3 places. It was shingles in 3 places and an underlayment issue in 2 sections and a flashing problem around the chimney pipe that Terrence found when he got up there and described to Cole in terms that made clear it had been quietly accumulating disaster potential for at least 2 years. "One hard rain," Terrence said. "One hard rain and the northwest corner of the bedroom ceiling came down. They dealt with all of it. Terrence directed with the calm authority of a man who knew exactly what he was doing, and Hatch and two others followed his lead without complaint. And by the time they came down the ladders for the last time, the roof was better than it had been in years. Better probably than it had ever been since the house was built. Nora fed them twice. Coffee first, then sandwiches at noon made from whatever was in the house, which wasn't much, and she'd made them anyway, with the quality of something done from dignity rather than obligation. She sat on the porch steps while the men loaded the trucks, holding a glass of iced tea in both hands, watching the street with the expression of someone caught between gratitude and something she hadn't finished naming yet. Cole sat beside her. "You should have told me," she said. "You would have said no." "Yes," she said. "That's why you should have told me." He held his coffee. A car went by on Carver Street. Down the block, a neighbor's dog started barking at something in the distance. "Why?" she asked then. "Not the roof. Something larger. Why does it matter to you? These men. You didn't know us 6 weeks ago." "6 weeks ago, I pulled your son out of a hot car," Cole said. "That's not an answer." He looked at the street, at Hatch and Terrence loading the last of the materials, moving with the easy efficiency of men who'd worked together long enough to do it without talking. "No," he said. "It's not." She waited. She was good at waiting, the patience of someone who had learned that most people filled silence with the thing they'd been trying not to say. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Not today. Soon." She looked at him with the expression of a woman who had heard "not today" too many times from people who never got too soon. The look landed with weight, and they both felt it, and neither of them pretended otherwise. "Okay," she said. And it wasn't entirely okay, and they both knew that too. Jamie came around the corner of the house at a run. "Is it time for the motorcycle?" he demanded. Cole sat on the Harley in the driveway with Jamie in front of him. Small hands wrapped around the handlebar grips and walked him through every component of the bike with methodical care. What it was, what it did, why it mattered. The throttle, the clutch, the front brake, the tank, the engine, which was off and silent, but which Jamie touched with the flat of his palm and looked up with an expression of genuine discovery. "It's warm," Jamie said. "Holds heat," Cole said, "even when it's off." Jamie thought about this seriously, the way he thought about everything. "Like a person," he said. Cole looked at the back of the boy's head, the dark hair slightly damp at the edges from running around all morning. The set of his small shoulders on the big bike completely without fear, as though the bike were something he had always been going to sit on. "Yeah," Cole said quietly. "Like a person." Terrence had come around to collect the last of his tools, and he stood beside his van watching this, and his face had the expression Cole had learned to recognize in older men who had been through enough of life to know a moment that mattered when it appeared directly in front of them. Nora was watching from the porch, arms crossed, iced tea forgotten on the railing behind her. She was watching her son on a motorcycle in the afternoon sun with the ease of a child who believed completely that he was safe. And the expression on her face was the most complicated thing Cole had seen in months. Love clearly, and underneath the love, fear. And underneath the fear, the specific grief of someone watching a child receive something he should have always had from someone who was not the person who should have been giving it. Cole looked away. He drove home that evening with the locked room pressing harder than it had before. He needed to tell her. He understood that now with a clarity that hadn't been there a week ago. The debt wasn't abstract anymore. It had an address and a roof he just fixed, and a kid who handed him tools and said things like a person with the casual profundity of the very young. The debt had a face, and the untold truth was eating at him the way untold truths always did, slowly from the inside, the way rust worked on iron that looked solid until the day it didn't. He went to Nora's house on Wednesday evening. He'd planned to call ahead this time. He was on his way with his flip phone out when he put it back in his pocket and kept riding. Calling ahead gave her time to prepare defenses. He needed her without the preparation for this particular conversation, and he knew that wasn't entirely fair, and he came anyway. She answered the door in her work uniform. pale green polo, name tag still pinned. The face of a woman who had just finished a double shift and was still standing because she had not yet given herself permission to stop. She looked at his face and something shifted in her expression immediately, the alertness of someone who reads people for survival and has just read something new in a face she'd been learning. "Come in," she said. Jamie was at the kitchen table with his homework, first grade worksheets, handwriting practice that he was approaching with the same focused intensity he brought to everything. He looked up when Cole came in. "Hey," Jamie said. "Hey," Cole said. "Keep working." Jamie assessed him for 1 second with those brown eyes, then went back to his worksheet. Nora set 2 glasses of water on the table without asking and sat across from Cole with her hands flat on the table, not braced exactly, but ready. "I need to tell you something," Cole said. "About Michael." Her hands on the table became very still. He told her. He told her about Route 93 in February 6 years ago. He was careful with the language, honest, without being graphic, choosing words that gave her the truth without handing her images she'd have to carry in his place. He told her about 11 months of medication that hadn't worked right, and 3 months after that, when he hadn't worked right, and one night on the shoulder of the highway when a decision had been sitting in front of him that he was not proud of. He told her about a beat-up Honda with a cracked taillight, a man who got out, 4 hours in below freezing cold, gas station crackers from the back seat, a man who drove slowly behind his truck for 15 miles to make sure he got home. He told her he'd never known the man's last name. He told her he'd found out the last name 6 weeks ago in a hospital room when a 6-year-old said it in a voice like dry paper. He watched her face through all of it. She didn't cry. He hadn't expected her to. Her face went through things, recognition first, then the specific shock of a fact that reorganized all the other facts around it. And then something he couldn't name, something that had the quality of a thing arriving home after a very long time away from where it belonged. Jamie's pencil scratched against paper in the silence. "He never told me," Nora said finally. "What?" That he stopped. She looked at her hands. "He never mentioned it. Michael didn't." She paused, tried again. "He didn't talk about things he did for people. He just did them and moved on." Cole held his water glass. "I know I should have told you sooner," he said. "Yes," she said. "You should have." "I'm telling you now." "Yes." She looked at him directly the way she looked at things she was actually examining rather than managing. "Why now?" "What changed?" "It was getting heavier," he said, "carrying it." She held his gaze for a long moment, reading him with the same directness she brought to everything. Then she looked away. "I need to think," she said. "Okay. I'm not saying go. I'm saying I need to think about this." "I understand." He stood. He picked up the water glass and drank the rest of it and set it carefully by the sink. Turned to go. "Cole," she said. He turned. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me. And for—" She stopped. Looked at Jamie at the table pencil still moving, working the letters with enormous care. "For stopping." He held her gaze for a moment. "He did it first," he said. He let himself out. The night air had the first real edge of September in it. Not cold yet, but arriving the quality of Nevada air when summer had finally decided to negotiate its departure. He stood on the porch for a moment and breathed it in. The street was quiet. A neighbor's porch light threw a yellow circle on the sidewalk. He got to his bike and swung on and sat for a moment without starting it. Through the window of the house, he could see Nora's back, still at the kitchen table, still sitting where he'd left her, not moving. The stillness of someone whose entire understanding of a thing has just been rearranged and who needs more than a moment to put the new arrangement in order. He started the bike. He didn't notice the car until he was pulling away from the curb. Dark sedan, Nevada plates, parked across the street 2 houses down, facing the wrong direction for parking on that side of the road. He registered it the way he registered things, without urgency, without alarm, just the filing mechanism that had kept him alive for 16 years of riding. Wrong direction, which meant someone had either come from the opposite way in a hurry or had pulled over to observe something specific. He rode past slowly. The interior of the sedan was dark, but the engine was running. He could see the faint exhaust from the tailpipe in the cooling September air. He rode to the end of Carver Street, turned north, circled back 2 blocks over, parked the bike behind a fence line, and walked back to the corner on foot. The sedan was still there. A man in the driver's seat. Cole couldn't make out a face from this distance, but the body language was specific, upright, still watching. Not parked, observing. The posture of someone with a purpose. Cole stood at the corner for 4 minutes. The sedan didn't move. Then it did. Engine rev and pull from the curb. Slow pass down Carver Street with the headlights off until it reached the end of the block, then headlights on acceleration onto the main road. Headlights off until the end of the block. Cole stood on the dark corner and felt something cold settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the September air. He went back to his bike and took out his flip phone. "Somebody's watching the Parker house," he said when Strick picked up. A pause. "How long?" "Don't know. I caught it tonight. Could be first time, could be not." "Recognize the car?" "No. Partial plate, Nevada. Starts with 47. Strick was quiet for a moment, in the specific way he was quiet when he was already thinking 3 moves ahead. "You telling her," Strick said. Cole looked at the empty street, at the warm light in Nora's window, at the darkness where the sedan had been. "Tomorrow," he said. "Cole, tomorrow," he said again. Tonight was already enough. He hung up and sat on the bike in the September dark and thought about a woman at her kitchen table rearranging everything she thought she knew, and a boy doing handwriting practice with the focused certainty of someone who believed the world was essentially safe. He needed to keep that belief intact. He was not yet sure how long he could. Devlin had the registration by 9 the next morning. 2 hours of work, a partial plate, a physical description of the vehicle, and a favor called in at the county records office. He brought the printout to Cole in the garage, single page folded once. Cole looked at the name. Raymond Briggs. He looked at Devlin. "Who is he?" Devlin's face had the quality of someone delivering information they'd rather not carry. "He's Nora's brother-in-law," he said. "Michael Parker's older brother." Cole held the printout. "He's been around before," Devlin said. "There's a restraining order on record. Nora filed it 14 months ago. It lapsed in March." "Why did she file it?" Devlin looked at his hands. "He wanted custody of Jamie after Michael died. Petitioned twice. Court sided with Nora both times." A pause. "Third time he showed up at her workplace during her shift." Another pause. "He wasn't violent. He was just—" "How was he?" Cole said. Devlin thought about how to say it. "He told her she wasn't enough," he said finally. "That Jamie needed a Parker to raise him. That Michael would have wanted—" He stopped. "That kind of thing." Cole set the printout on the workbench and looked at it for a long time without picking it up again. Roy Briggs, sitting in a dark sedan on Carver Street with his engine running and his headlights off. A man twice denied by the courts. A man who had gone to a widow's workplace to tell her she wasn't enough. A man who had watched the restraining order lapse in March and had apparently decided that March was the right time to start watching again. And now he had 6 weeks of photographs. 6 weeks of Cole's truck in the driveway. 6 weeks of chapter members on the roof. 6 weeks of a motorcycle club woven into the daily life of the woman he was trying to take a child away from. Cole folded the printout and put it in his jacket pocket. He called Nora from the parking lot. She answered on the second ring. He told her about the sedan, about the registration, about Roy's presence on Carver Street. The silence on her end was long enough that he checked the phone to make sure the call was still connected. "I know," she said finally. "I thought the restraining order lapsed and I didn't renew it because I couldn't afford the lawyer fees and I thought he'd given up." "He hasn't given up," Cole said. No, she said. I can see that. He asked her to lock the doors. She told him they were already locked. He told her he'd come by in the morning. She told him she was fine. He told her he was coming anyway. The chapter meeting the following Monday went sideways before it started. Cole read the room the moment he walked in. There was a specific atmospheric quality to trouble in a group of men who'd known each other long enough. Something tighter than usual, something that tracked him as he moved toward the coffee. He identified the source before he reached the pot. Decker, 42 years old, 7 years in the chapter. The kind of resentment that grew in men who believed they deserved more than they had, more rank, more respect, more weight in the room. He was a competent rider and a useful mechanic, and he had a mean precision with people that he exercised in the way of men who were too smart to be overtly cruel and not smart enough to understand what that said about them. He was sitting at the far end of the pool table with his arms crossed, in the quality of attention that meant he'd been sitting there preparing something. Good weekend, Decker said. Cole didn't look up from the coffee. Fine, he said. Heard you took half the chapter to play handyman for some woman on Carver Street, Decker said. The room was quiet. Not the good quiet from Saturday. The other kind. Cole turned around. He looked at Decker, not angry, not broadcasting anything, just level and patient, and prepared to stay level and patient for as long as the situation required. We fixed a roof, Cole said. Uh-huh. Hatch, Terrence, Devlin, 3 others. Yes, on a Saturday. Roofs don't care what day it is. Decker leaned forward. You're using chapter resources, he said. Chapter time, without a vote. I asked. People came. You asked Strick. Strick is president, but Strick doesn't speak for everyone. Decker's eyes moved around the room collecting. We've got our own people. Members with problems of their own who could use a Saturday crew. Name one, Cole said. Name one member who needed a roof done last Saturday and didn't get it because we were on Carver Street. Silence. That's not the point. That's exactly the point, Cole said. You don't have one. So what this is actually about is something else. Decker's jaw tightened. It's about you making decisions for the chapter based on personal business you haven't explained. Who is this woman? What do we owe her? Why are we putting in days of labor for someone most of us have never met? She's not a stranger to me. She is to us. Decker opened his hands. That's the point. You know something we don't. You've been going to that house for weeks. Now you're bringing the chapter into it. And nobody knows why because you won't explain yourself. The room had the quality of held breath. Cole recognized what was happening. Decker had prepared this. The construction wasn't entirely wrong. The grievance had legitimate bones, which was what made it dangerous. Decker wasn't completely wrong about the transparency problem. He was just using it wrong. There's something I haven't told you, Cole said. He said it to Decker and also to the room. Decker blinked. That wasn't what he'd expected. About Michael Parker, Cole said. Nora's husband. He told them. He told them about Route 93 in February, about the state he'd been in, not performing it, not dramatizing it, just stating it the way you stated facts that had weight. The medication that hadn't worked. The months when he hadn't worked. The night on the shoulder when a decision had been in front of him that he was not proud of. A beat-up Honda. A man named Michael who had stayed 4 hours in the cold because he had decided that a stranger was worth staying for. He told them he'd never known the man's last name. He told them he'd found out the last name 6 weeks ago in a hospital room when a 6-year-old boy said it in a voice like dry paper. When he finished, the room was different. Not the contested silence of 5 minutes ago. Something heavier, something with texture and weight. The silence of men who had ridden long enough to know what a night like that cost and what a man who stopped on that night was worth. Hatch looked at the floor. Terrence put his coffee down slowly, carefully, as if the mug had become something more fragile than it appeared. Decker said nothing. That's what we owe him, Cole said. That's why. He poured the rest of his coffee in the sink, walked out of the common room, went down to the garage and got under a truck that didn't need work and lay there in the dark under the chassis and breathed. With the smell of oil and concrete and the hum of the fluorescent work light above him and the weight of what he just put down pressing outward in his chest in ways he hadn't anticipated, Strick came down 20 minutes later. He didn't say anything for a while. He leaned against the workbench and waited with the patience of a man who had learned that some things needed space before they could be spoken. "You didn't have to say all that," Strick said finally. "Yeah, I did," Cole said from under the truck. "I could have handled Decker." Decker wasn't entirely wrong. A pause. Cole came out from under the truck on the rolling creeper. Lay there looking at the ceiling, the water stain in the shape of something he'd never been able to identify. He'd been looking at it for 11 years. "I was operating on information the chapter didn't have," Cole said. "That's a legitimate point. The delivery was—" "I know what the delivery was," Strick said. Cole looked at the ceiling. "How long have you been carrying that?" Strick said. 6 years. "You never told me." "No." Strick was quiet. Then carefully, "Were you going to that night?" The question was specific and deserved a real answer. "I don't know," Cole said. "I don't think so." Strick nodded once slowly. "Okay," he said. "That was all? Just okay? And the weight of that, the specific weight of being known by someone who didn't need you to explain yourself past the point where explaining became damage, sat on Cole's chest in a way that made his eyes burn for 1 second before he shut it down. "Decker's going to be a problem," Cole said. "Decker's always a problem," Strick said. "I'll handle it." "Not by pushing him down. That makes it worse. I know how to handle Decker." Strick said it with the patience of a man who had been handling the situation for 7 years. "Nora doesn't know yet. About the highway." "No, I already told her. Last Wednesday." Strick looked at him. Something shifted in his expression. "How'd she take it?" "She said she needed to think." "And—" Cole wiped his hands on a shop rag. "And Roy Briggs was parked outside her house with his lights off." Roy Briggs arrived at Carver Street on a Thursday afternoon. Cole had driven past twice that week and had not seen the sedan. He had begun to think that the Wednesday night sighting had been a one-time thing. He had begun to think that with the particular optimism of a man who wanted a problem to be smaller than it was. He pulled onto Carver Street at 4 in the afternoon and saw the sedan immediately parked directly in front. Engine off. Roy Briggs standing on the sidewalk with his phone out and a man in a gray suit beside him. The man in the gray suit had the posture of someone who charged $400 an hour and was entirely comfortable with that. Cole parked the Harley at the curb and killed the engine. Roy turned at the sound. He was 52, thick through the shoulders, a face that had been handsome once and had hardened over the years into something else. He wore a jacket with a construction company logo on the chest, the Parker family business, the name, the weight he carried everywhere, like a tool he'd learned to use. He looked at Cole's cut with the contempt of someone who had decided what the patches meant before he'd finished reading them. "You must be the biker," Roy said. Cole swung off the bike and stood. "You must be the brother," he said. The gray suit man put his phone away. "I'm here to see my nephew," Roy said. "Nora's home," Cole said. "She'll tell you the same thing she's told you before. Rachel doesn't make decisions about Parker family matters. Her name is Nora, and she's his mother. That makes her the decision." Roy's jaw moved slightly. "You've been at this house for 6 weeks," he said. "In and out, fixing things, bringing men here." He looked at the house, then back at Cole. "In front of my nephew." "Your nephew needed a roof." "My nephew needs family," Roy said. "Not a motorcycle club." The word landed the way Roy intended it to land, like a classification, like a verdict already rendered. Cole held the eye contact and said nothing, and Roy knew that the nothing was its own kind of answer, and Roy didn't like what it said about him. The front door opened. Nora stood in the doorway. She'd seen them from the window. Cole could tell from the set of her shoulders the posture of a woman who had spent 10 seconds preparing for something she'd hoped not to face. Roy, she said. Nora. Roy's voice shifted slightly. A calibrated warmth, the specific modulation of a man who adjusted himself for audiences. I came to talk calmly about Jamie. You came with a lawyer, she said. Gerald is here as a courtesy. Go home, Roy. I'm not going to do that. He glanced at Cole. I think we should discuss. Cole took one step forward. One step. That was all. But Gerald the lawyer put a hand on Roy's arm and Roy stepped back, and all three of them understood what had happened in that single step without any of it needing to be spoken. You need to leave, Cole said. Now. Roy looked at him for a long moment. The calculation happening behind his eyes was visible from across the sidewalk. I'll see you in court, Nora, he said. He walked back to the sedan. Gerald followed. The engine started and they pulled away and Cole stood on the sidewalk until the car was fully out of sight before he turned to the porch. Nora was holding the door frame with one hand. He's getting worse, she said. Yeah, Cole said. I know. Inside the house had the quality of a place that belonged to a child when the child wasn't in it. Jamie's drawings on the refrigerator, small shoes by the front door, the yellow toy motorcycle on the coffee table. Nora sat at the kitchen table with both hands around a coffee mug she'd forgotten to fill. Cole filled it without asking and sat across from her. He'll use everything, she said. The chapter, the photographs, the parking lot video. She said it flatly like someone reciting a list they'd memorized. He'll say I'm exposing Jamie to a dangerous environment, that my associations demonstrate poor judgment, that Jamie needs the Parker name and Parker resources. She paused. He'll stand in front of a judge and make it look exactly like what Roy needs it to look like. He'll say what he was already going to say, Cole said, whether we help with the roof or not. The question is whether you're better defended. She looked at the mug. I need a lawyer. I know someone, Cole said. Someone the chapter uses. She knows how these cases work. A pause. Cole. Nora's voice was careful, deliberate. If the chapter helps me with this, Roy will use it. He'll say I'm deeper in than I am. He'll say what he was already going to say, Cole said again. The choice isn't between Roy having ammunition and Roy not having ammunition. The choice is between you having a defense and you not having one. She looked at the mug for a long time. I need to think, she said. It was the second time she'd said it in a week. But the weight was different now, not the weight of someone processing a revelation, but the weight of someone standing at the edge of a decision that had no safe option in any direction. The call came at 11:17 that night. Cole was in his room at the warehouse, not sleeping, lying on his back, looking at the ceiling. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, and he was already sitting up before he'd finished reading the screen. Not a call. A knock at his door, hard and fast. The kind that meant something had happened. Cole opened the door. Devlin was in his jacket, face wrong in a way that Cole registered before he'd consciously processed what wrong meant. Strick needs you, Devlin said. Garage, now. What happened? Devlin looked at him. Decker, he said. The garage was lit by the work light's harsh white, the kind that eliminated shadow and made everything look either very clean or very exposed. Strick was standing in the center of the space. Hatch was by the far wall with his arms crossed. Terrence was near the back, leaning against the tool chest, with an expression Cole had never seen on his face before. Decker was sitting in the rolling mechanic's chair with his jacket off and his arms resting on his knees. The posture of a man who had already decided on his version of events and was waiting for the room to accept it. Cole came in and looked at the room. Then he looked at Strick. Tell me, Cole said. Strick picked up his phone from the workbench and held out the screen. It showed a text thread. Short messages. Practical. Times addresses a description of Cole's bike and Cole's schedule over the past 3 weeks. The number they'd been sent to was a Ridgeline area code that Strick had already run. The number belonged to Gerald Crane, Roy Briggs's lawyer. Cole looked at the phone for a long time. Then he looked at Decker. Decker met his eyes without flinching, which was its own kind of information. How long? Cole said. 3 weeks, Decker said. The garage was very quiet, the kind of quiet that happened when several large men were in the same room and none of them were moving, and all of them understood precisely what had been done. Why? Cole said. Decker straightened his back. Because you brought personal business into chapter business without a vote, without transparency, and you put this club's reputation on the line for a woman you met 6 weeks ago because of a debt nobody else agreed to pay. He said it with the precision of something rehearsed. I wasn't going to let you burn this chapter down over. You gave my schedule to a man trying to take a child from his mother, Cole said. I gave information to a family with a legitimate legal concern. Strick, Cole said. One word. Decker. Strick's voice was flat as a road. Decker stopped. You fed information about a member's movements to opposing counsel in a custody case involving a 6-year-old boy. Strick set the phone down on the workbench with careful deliberateness. That's what you did. The fluorescent lights hummed. Decker's jaw moved. She's not our responsibility, Decker said. Get out of the garage, Strick said. Strick. Daniel. The given name. Cole had never heard Strick use it before. It landed on Decker like something physical. Right now, go to your room. Don't come back into common spaces until I come to you. Decker blinked. The prepared speech fell away for 1 second, and beneath it was something younger and less certain. Then it came back. He stood, picked up his jacket, and walked out without looking at Cole. The garage breathed. Hatch moved away from the wall and came to stand beside Cole and put one hand briefly on his shoulder. Nothing prolonged, nothing stated, just a hand on a shoulder and then gone. The physical language of men who didn't perform things, but who meant them. Cole looked at Strick. How much does Crane have? 3 weeks of your schedule, Strick said. Times you were at the house. He also has Roy's photographs. A pause. There's a motion filed. Roy's attorney filed it 2 hours ago. Cole put both hands flat on the workbench. Hearings in 10 days, Strick said. 10 days, Cole stood with his hands on the workbench and felt the geometry of the situation rearrange itself around him. Crane had the schedule, the photographs, the parking lot video. 6 weeks of structured narrative built around a motorcycle club's involvement with a single mother and her child. He would stand in front of a judge and construct it into exactly what Roy Briggs needed it to be. And Decker had handed him the architecture. There's something else, Strick said. He picked up a manila envelope from the workbench. It had been sitting there since Cole walked in registered but unasked about because the garage had been loud with other things. This came to the warehouse today, Strick said. Addressed to you, no return address. Cole took it, opened it. Inside was a single photograph printed on plain paper, the kind you printed at home. It showed his Harley parked in front of Nora's house, his bike specifically. The license plate circled in pen. On the back, handwritten, "You're making this worse for them. Walk away." No signature. Cole read it twice, set it on the workbench. Someone else, he said. Agreed, Strick said. Not Roy, not Crane. The handwriting is different from anything in Roy's filings. And Roy wouldn't tell you to walk away. He wants you visible. You're his evidence. Cole looked at the photograph. A third party. Someone who knew enough about the situation to know that his presence was a pressure point and who was willing to use that to get him gone. Someone who thought they were protecting Nora and Jamie. The phrasing worse for them. Not a warning about consequences to Cole. Concern about consequences to them. Get everyone together, he said. Everyone who was at Carver Street. I need to know if anyone else received anything. Any contact, any approach, any conversation that felt off in the last 3 weeks. Strick looked at him for a moment, reading the quality of what Cole was carrying. Then he picked up his phone and started making calls. They assembled in the common room in 20 minutes. 7 men. Strick at the head of the pool table. Cole standing. Hatch, Terrence, Devlin, 2 others. Cole laid out the photograph, the message, the timing, same day Crane filed his motion. Either coincidence, which he didn't believe in at a professional level, or coordination. He asked them directly. Anyone approached, contacted, offered anything pressured, anything that had felt off. Silence, then Terrence said quietly, "I got a call." Every head in the room turned. Terrence was leaning forward now, elbows on knees, looking at his hands with the expression of a man who has been holding something and has just identified the right moment to set it down. "2 weeks ago," he said. "Number I didn't recognize. Man asked me about the work we did on the house. Casual, like he was just curious." A pause. He asked specifically about Cole and the woman, whether it was personal. "What did you tell him?" Strick said. "Nothing," Terrence said. "I hung up." He looked at Cole. "I should have said something sooner. I didn't think it was connected." "What was his voice like?" Cole said. Terrence thought about it. "Older," he said. "Controlled, not aggressive, like someone who'd learned not to lead with what he actually wanted." Cole filed it. He called Nora from the parking lot. She answered on the second ring. He told her about the photograph, about Decker, about Terrence's call. The silence on her end stretched long enough that he could hear her breathing change. "There's something I should have told you," she said finally. He waited. "Michael's family," she said. "Not Roy's side. The other side. His mother's side." A pause. "There was a man, Michael's uncle, Gene Carver." Something moved in Cole at the name, a small shift like a lock turning before you knew you had the key. "Gene and Roy have hated each other for 20 years, Nora said. "The family split when Michael was young. Gene got nothing in the estate division. Roy got everything." Another pause. "Gene contacted me after Michael died. He was kind. He helped me with the first custody petition, gave me information about Roy's history that I used in court." "Is he still in contact?" Cole said. "He checks in. Not often, but he's always said that outside involvement would give Roy ammunition. He's been telling me for months to keep Jamie's life quiet. Simple. Nothing Roy could use." Her voice was careful now. "And then you showed up." Cole stood in the parking lot in the September cold and let the shape of it assemble. Gene Carver, a man with a long-term investment in Nora and Jamie's safety. A man who understood Roy's patterns, Roy's strategy, Roy's weaknesses. A man who had been an invisible support structure for 2 years, who had watched Cole's arrival with growing alarm because he understood precisely how Roy would use it, and who had finally sent a photograph and 4 words to try to remove the variable before it became a weapon. "Is he right?" Cole said. "I don't know," Nora said. The words came out with the weight of a real answer rather than a deflection. "Maybe. Cole, the hearing is in 10 days. Crane has everything." "I know. If a judge looks at this and sees a motorcycle club in Jamie's daily life—" "I know," Cole said again. A long silence. "I need to talk to Gene," she said. "Tonight, Nora." Cole kept his voice level. "Whoever he is, he contacted my chapter. He surveilled my movements. He tried to shape this situation without coming to me directly. I need to look at him and make sure he is what you think he is." The silence on her end changed quality. "What do you mean?" she said. "I mean," Cole said carefully, "that I've been surprised twice in 2 weeks by people I didn't know were watching. And the debt I carry goes to Michael, not to Gene. And I don't know Gene." She was quiet for a long moment. "I'll call him tonight," she said. "Tonight," Cole confirmed. She hung up. Cole sat on the bike in the parking lot and looked up at the sky. Cloudless. Cold. Stars thrown across it with the indifference of things that had been present long before any of this and would remain long after. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. He opened it. A photograph. Not his bike this time. Jamie on the school playground running with his arms out, completely unaware of being watched. The shot had been taken from outside the fence through the chain link with a lens long enough to compress the distance and make it look close. The boy's face was clear, unguarded, the face of a child who believed completely that the world he could see was the whole world. Below the photograph, one line. Roy knows where he goes to school. You have less time than you think. Cole read it 3 times. Roy used courts. Roy used lawyers and the Parker name and the weight of money behind both. Roy didn't send photographs of children through school fences. This message came from somewhere else. He called Strick. Get everyone up, he said. Right now. Cole, it's past midnight. I know what time it is, Cole said. Get everyone up and call Nora Parker and tell her to keep Jamie home from school tomorrow. A pause, Strick reading the specific quality of what Cole's voice was carrying. How bad, Strick said. Cole looked at the photograph on his screen. A 6-year-old boy running on a playground with his arms out, like wings caught through a chain-link fence, by someone who wanted Cole Ryder to understand precisely how far this had already gone and how much further it could go. Bad enough, Cole said. He started the bike. The engine turned over in the dark, and the sound of it rolled out across the empty parking lot and toward the highway beyond. Cole rode toward it with the September cold pressing against his face and the photograph burning in his pocket, and the understanding arriving now with the clarity that always came too late, that what was in front of him was not a straight line anymore. It was a crossroads, and every direction required him to become something he hadn't been before. Cole rode through this cold with the photograph burning in his jacket pocket and the engine underneath him, the only steady thing in the world. He called Nora twice before she picked up. He told her in 8 sentences. Keep Jamie home tomorrow. Lock the doors. Don't answer unless you know who it is. He'd be there in 20 minutes. He was there in 14. Strick arrived 11 minutes after Cole, his truck pulling up 2 houses down the block. Hatch was in the passenger seat, Devlin in the back. They parked down the street and walked to the house without being told to, because they understood instinctively how this looked from the outside, and were not going to give Roy Briggs one more frame of footage. Inside, Nora was at the kitchen table with Jamie in her lap. The boy was half asleep, confused, clinging to her with the boneless trust of a child who didn't know what was wrong, but knew that his mother was frightened. Nora's hand was moving in slow circles on his back. Automatic. The motion of a woman whose body was keeping her child calm while the rest of her was somewhere very different. Cole crouched down in front of them. Jamie opened his eyes, looked at Cole with the expression of a child who is not fully awake, but is capable of reading the room anyway. Hey, Jamie said. Hey, Cole said. You're okay. Jamie considered this, accepted it with the trust of someone who had decided some weeks ago that Cole's word was sufficient. He closed his eyes again and pressed his face against his mother's shoulder. Cole stood and looked at Nora over the boy's head, and the look they exchanged had no words in it and didn't need any. Terrence arrived at 2 in the morning. He came in quietly and took a position near the back of the house without being asked, because years of riding beside men who thought before they acted had taught him where to stand. Nobody slept. Gene Carver arrived at 6 in the morning. Gray pickup, Nevada plates. He parked it in the driveway without hesitation and knocked twice before Cole opened the door. 2 knocks, not tentative, not aggressive. The knock of a man who had made up his mind and was here to follow through. He was 67 years old, thin with white hair cut short. His face had been trained over a long time to give away very little, but there were things in it, old things that had settled so deep they'd become part of the structure itself. He looked at Cole's cut. He looked at the men visible through the windows. He looked at the house, the locked door, the lights on at 6 in the morning, the atmosphere of a place that had shifted from a home into something that needed defending. You got my message, Gene said. You got mine, Cole said, and stood back. Gene came in. They sat in the living room. Cole stripped Gene Nora, who had put Jamie in his room with his sketchbook and the instruction to draw until she came to get him. 4 people in a room with the quality of a space where something was about to be decided, where the decision had weight and the weight was not going to be distributed evenly. Gene looked at Nora first. How much time, he said. 9 days, she said. The motion was filed yesterday. Jean's jaw tightened slightly, the only visible movement in an otherwise controlled face. Crane's good, he said. I know his work. He'll build three arguments: environmental instability, exposure to criminal association, and failure to maintain the Parker family connection. He glanced at Cole. The photographs make the second argument easy. The photographs Roy took, Cole said. Roy took them himself, Jean said. 3 weeks of Saturday mornings. He said it without apology and without pretense. I know because I've been watching Roy watch you. He paused. That's why I sent the message. I needed you gone before he had enough. You should have come to me directly, Cole said. Jean looked at him steadily. I didn't know you, he said. I knew what you looked like in a photograph. A man in a cut outside a widow's house. His eyes were level, not hostile. I made an assumption. I'm revising it. Revise faster, Cole said. Because the playground photograph wasn't Roy. Jean went very still. The specific stillness of a man whose model of the situation has just been changed by a fact he didn't have. What? Nora said. Roy uses courts, Cole said. He uses lawyers and the family name and the weight of money behind both. The playground is a different message. The playground says I can reach him anywhere. That's not evidence gathering. That's a threat. And Roy Briggs doesn't make threats. He looked at Jean. You said so yourself. Jean was quiet for a long moment. The room was quiet with him, the silence of everyone present working through the same problem and arriving at the same blank wall. If someone took that photograph, Strick said from the corner where he'd been standing since they sat down, then someone else is in this. Jean looked at Strick. Roy didn't send me the photograph, Cole said. Roy wants me visible. I'm his evidence. Whoever sent that photograph thought they were protecting Nora and Jamie by warning me off. But the playground shot came from a different direction entirely. He let that sit. So either whoever sent me the walkaway message sent both, which means their plan changed, or there are two separate parties watching this house, and one of them is not operating the way you think. Jean looked at the table. He was quiet for long enough that it became the quiet of someone deciding how much to say rather than someone thinking. Gerald Crane has a partner, Jean said finally. He said it the way you said something you'd been carrying for a long time in a private place. Crane doesn't work alone, Jean continued. He has a junior partner, Eric Wills. Wills handles the surveillance, the documentation, the things Crane doesn't want his name directly attached to. He paused. Wills has a history. Before law, before the bar exam, he did field work for a private investigation firm. He doesn't just take photographs in parking lots. Jean looked at Cole. He takes photographs of playgrounds, Jean said. The silence after that had a physical presence in the room, the kind you could feel against your skin. He's escalating for Roy, Cole said. Or he's escalating for himself, Jean said. Wills takes cases that pay and cases that satisfy other things. I don't know his full history with the Parker family. He paused. But I know he's been to Ridgeline before Crane hired him, before the custody petition. Nora's face had gone the color of someone whose blood pressure had just done something significant. When, she said, her voice was steady. It cost her something to keep it that way. Jean looked at her. 4 years ago, he said. Around the time Michael's accident investigation closed. The word accident landed wrong. They all felt it land wrong. Cole looked at Jean directly. Michael's accident, Cole said. The motorcycle crash, Jean said. He met Cole's eyes. Michael didn't crash. I don't believe he did. I never believed it. He stopped, breathed. The investigation said ice on the road, single vehicle, no witnesses. Michael had been riding for 20 years. He rode in worse than that. He paused. And 2 weeks before he died, he called me. He said he'd found something in the Parker construction financial records, something involving a rezoning deal. He said there was a name in a transaction that shouldn't be there. Jean's voice remained level, but underneath it, very far underneath, There was something old and unhealed that had been living there long enough to become part of the architecture. He never told me the name. He died 5 days after that call. The room didn't breathe. Nora had both hands flat on the table. Her eyes were fixed on Jean with an expression that was beyond shock, the expression of someone whose entire understanding of the most important thing that had ever happened to them has just cracked open at its foundation. Cole stood. Everyone looked at him. "Jamie stays here," he said. He looked at Strick. "You stay with them." "Already here," Strick said. He hadn't moved from his position near the back of the room, but he had the quality of a man who had already decided on all possible responses to all possible developments and was simply waiting for the one that arrived. "Hatch," Cole said. "Back of the house," Hatch said from the kitchen. He'd positioned himself there at some point in the night without anyone asking and had been there ever since. Cole looked at Jean. If Wills was in Ridgeline 4 years ago and he's active now, then whatever Michael found is still dangerous to someone. That means it's still out there. And if it's still out there, there's something that can end this not in 9 days in front of a judge, but now today, before Wills decides the playground photograph wasn't enough of a message. Jean looked at him for a long moment. "Crane's office is on 5th, Jean said. Wills works out of a separate space, storage unit converted, industrial park on the east side of Ridgeline, Unit 14. A pause. "I've known where he worked for 8 months. I was waiting until I had something worth using." "Now you do," Cole said. He looked at Strick. Strick was already pulling his keys. They went out into the early morning. The bikes were cold and the engines took a moment to catch, and then they were running, the sound of them filling the quiet street with something that had no ambiguity in it. Something moving deliberately toward whatever had been hiding in the shape of the Parker family for 4 years. Nora stood in the doorway. Jamie appeared beside her sketchbook under one arm, the blue crayon tucked behind his ear. He looked at Cole on the idling Harley with the open, certain expression he always had, without reservation, without calculation, the face of a child who had decided somewhere in the week since a parking lot in July that this particular man was safe. Cole looked at the boy. He thought about Michael Parker on a winter highway, leaning against a cracked taillight in below-freezing cold, staying because he had decided that a stranger was worth staying for. He thought about what that decision had cost in time and cold, and the commitment it took to stay for 4 hours when leaving was available every minute of those 4 hours. He thought about what it meant that the man who'd made that decision might not have died on ice. He put the bike in gear. The industrial park was 9 minutes east on roads that were empty at this hour. They rode without talking because there was nothing to say that the riding wasn't already saying. Unit 14 was dark when they arrived. Rolling metal door closed, a single fluorescent light leaking in a thin line under the gap at the bottom. Someone was inside. Cole and Strick pulled up and killed their engines. They sat for a moment in the silence of the industrial park. No other movement, no other lights, just the distant sound of the highway and the light under the door and the quality of air that preceded a confrontation that could not be undone once it began. Cole swung off the bike. He walked to the door. He raised his fist and knocked 3 times. Slow, deliberate. The knock of a man who had made a decision about where he was going to stand and was not going to move from it regardless of what came next. From inside movement, a chair scraping, footsteps. The rolling door began to rise. Standing in the spreading light of Unit 14 with a laptop open on a folding table behind him, and a cell phone in his hand, and the expression of a man startled out of something he hadn't expected to be interrupted, was someone Cole had never seen before. Eric Wills was 41 years old, medium height with the soft build of a man who did his work sitting down, and at distance who had never needed to be physically imposing because the tools of his trade didn't require it. He had unremarkable features and careful eyes, the eyes of someone trained to observe without being observed, which meant he was very rarely on the receiving end of being looked at the way Cole was looking at him now. He looked at Cole. He looked at Strick. He looked at the cut on Cole's shoulders. And then his eyes went to the corkboard on the wall behind him, the way a man's eyes went to the thing he most needed you not to see, and Cole followed the look. The corkboard covered most of the back wall. Photographs, dozens of them. Nora coming out of her front door, Nora at her car, Nora in her work uniform in the parking lot of her second job, Jamie on the sidewalk in front of the house, Jamie at the school fence, the same angle as the photograph Cole had received. Cole's bike in front of the house, different days, different times, the light changing across the same frame like a record of weeks passing. The house on Carver Street from 4 different angles. Hatch on the roof, Terrence on the roof, the chapter trucks in the driveway. And in the lower right corner of the board, beneath a photograph of a man Cole recognized from the sketchbook, drawing the general shape of a man who had the same eyes as a 6-year-old boy, a document, partially visible. A financial record with a header Cole could read from where he stood because the lettering was large and clear under the fluorescent light. At the top of the document, a name, not Roy Briggs, not Parker Construction, Gerald Crane. Cole read it once, read it again, felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the morning air and everything to do with the shape of 4 years suddenly coming clear. "Sit down," Cole said to Wills. Wills didn't sit down. He did what men like Wills did when the architecture of their situation collapsed. He went for the thing he most needed to take with him. He moved toward the laptop, toward the corkboard, reaching for something, and Cole covered the distance in 4 strides, and Strick came in from the left, and Wills made it approximately 2 feet before Strick's hand closed on his collar, and the momentum ended against the cinder block wall with a sound that was not quiet. "Sit down," Strick said. Wills sat. He had the expression of a man whose entire operating structure had just reduced itself to a single room with no exit, and 2 men who were not going to be managed or deflected or reasoned into anything other than the truth. Cole unpinned the financial document from the board. He looked at it carefully. Gerald Crane's name appeared in the header of a transfer record, a payment from a shell account connected to a municipal rezoning deal dated 14 months before Michael Parker's death. The kind of document that a licensed contractor working in the adjacent territory of Parker Construction would have legitimate reason to access. The kind of document that, if you found the right name in it, would tell you something someone very much did not want told. Cole photographed every document on the board, every photograph, every date stamp. He worked methodically without rushing the way he did everything that required precision. 14 months of surveillance on a family, 4 years of buried evidence, a dead man's trail leading from a municipal rezoning deal through a shell account to a lawyer who had built a career on knowing where the bodies were buried because he had helped put them there. When Cole finished, he stood in front of Wills. "Michael called Crane," Cole said. "He found the transfer records and he called someone he trusted to help him understand what he'd found. Someone who had done Parker family legal work for years. Someone he believed would help him figure out what he was looking at." Wills looked at the floor. "Didn't he?" Cole said. Wills said nothing. "Eric," Cole said. He said it quietly, the way he said things that needed to land without pressure, but would land regardless. "I have 14 months of your work on that board. I have a financial document connecting Crane to a transaction that should not exist. I have a dead man who found it and died 5 days after calling the wrong person." He crouched down to Wills's eye level. "Tell me what happened to Michael Parker." The fluorescent light hummed. Outside, the industrial park was beginning to lighten as the morning gathered itself. Wills's hands were shaking slightly. The fine tremor of a man who has held something difficult for a long time and can feel the holding giving way. "It was ice," Wills said. "The report said—" "I know what the report said," Cole said. "I'm asking what happened." Wills looked at the floor for a long time. "Crane made a call," Wills said finally. His voice was thin and precise, the voice of a man who had chosen confession over whatever came next and was moving through it with the forward momentum of someone who had made the decision and was not going to stop now. "I wasn't there. I didn't do anything to Michael Parker. Crane made a call to someone who knew someone, a contractor with debts of a different kind." A pause. "Michael was supposed to be scared off. That's what Crane said. Scared, not—" He didn't finish. The unfinished sentence sat in the room like a physical object taking up space. "Not killed," Strick said from the wall. Will said nothing. But he was, Cole said. A long silence. Yes, Will said. The word came out without inflection, without drama. The flattest possible word for the largest possible fact. Cole straightened up. He stood in Unit 14 with the morning light coming through the rising gap under the door, and the corkboard behind him covered in the evidence of 4 years of a family being watched and managed and kept afraid. And he felt something settle in him that was not peace and not anger, but something older than either the gravity of a truth finally brought into a room where it could be seen. He called Jean from the parking lot. Jean answered on the second ring. Cole told him in 8 sentences. The document, Crane's name, the transfer, Wills's statement, Michael calling Crane, Crane making a call, someone with debts of a different kind. Jean was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Cole could hear the quality of the silence change the sound of a man standing in a very large empty space that he had been circling for 4 years and had now finally entered. He knew, Jean said. His voice had something in it that was not quite broken and not quite whole. Michael knew something was wrong and he called the wrong person. A pause. He always trusted people too much. He would have wanted his family safe first, before the truth. Protected more than vindicated. I know, Cole said. Then get them safe, Jean said. Then truth. Cole hung up and stood in the parking lot with the morning opening around him. The sky was moving from gray to pale gold, the desert catching the first light along its flat edges, the highway in the distance running straight and indifferent toward a horizon that didn't care what had happened in the dark. He called Diane. Diane had been the chapter's attorney for 6 years. She was 53, precise, and had the quality of calm that came from being very good at something that other people found terrifying. She listened to Cole's summary without interrupting once, and when he finished, she was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. What you have is enough, she said. Give me 3 hours. She called back in 2. By 9:15 in the morning, Diane had submitted an emergency filing with a package that included Wills's recorded statement, photographs of every document on the corkboard, and a formal complaint of attorney misconduct against Gerald Crane filed with the Nevada State Bar. By 10 o'clock, the custody hearing had been stayed pending review. By 11:30, the phones at Crane's office had gone quiet in the specific way that phones went quiet when the partners inside had stopped answering because their own attorneys had told them not to. Roy Briggs called Nora twice. She didn't answer. He left a voicemail that was half accusation and half the dawning panicked awareness of a man who had just realized the ground under everything he'd built had been removed without warning. He had hired Crane in good faith, the voicemail said. He had not known. He had only wanted to protect Jamie. He had only wanted what was best. He had only wanted what Michael would have wanted. Nora listened to it once. She deleted it. She sat at the kitchen table with both hands around a coffee mug, and Jean sitting across from her and Cole standing at the window, and Jamie in the next room drawing motorcycles with the complete unconcerned focus of a child who had been told convincingly that everything was fine and had decided to believe it. He didn't crash, Nora said. Her voice was steady with the steadiness of a person who has moved past the point where the feeling could be expressed in anything as small as a voice breaking. No, Jean said. She absorbed this. It took a long time. Cole watched the quality of her face change, not all at once, not in a single visible moment, but slowly the way light changed in a room when clouds moved overhead and you noticed the difference only after it had already happened. The grief she had carried for 4 years was being replaced by a different grief and a different understanding, and the two things were so entangled that separating them would have required more than any of them had right now. He found something, she said, and he called the wrong person. Yes, Jean said, because he trusted people. She looked at her hands. He always did that. He always believed that people were better than the evidence suggested. He could never stop doing that. Her voice was steady. The steadiness was enormous. That's what got him. Nobody said anything. She looked at Cole. He stopped for strangers on highways, she said. He stopped for you. Yes, Cole said. And you came back. She held his gaze. For us. He held her gaze. I didn't know who you were, he said. Not at the parking lot. I just saw the window. I know, she said. But I would have come back anyway, Cole said. Once I knew. She nodded, not the nod of someone satisfied, but the nod of someone who understood it completely, who had been sitting with the shape of it for weeks and had finally found the place where it fit. The place where it made sense, not as coincidence, but as something that didn't have a clean name and was real regardless. Gene looked at the table. He would have liked you, he said. He said it quietly to no one in particular and to both of them simultaneously. Michael. He always said the people worth knowing were the ones who did things without needing to be asked. Cole looked at the window. At the ordinary Nevada street going about its ordinary business, completely unaware that something that had been wrong for 4 years had in the last 6 hours been made at least partially right. The sound of small feet. Jamie appeared in the doorway with his sketchbook under one arm and the blue crayon in his hand worn down now to less than half its original length. He had the slightly disheveled look of a child who had been drawing with serious concentration for 2 hours and was emerging from it the way you emerge from deep water, slightly dazed, already thinking about what came next. He looked at the room, at Jean, who carried the particular frequency of family even to a child who barely knew him, at his mother whose face he scanned with the precision of a child who had been reading it for his entire conscious life, at Cole. Is everything okay? Jamie said. Nora turned and held out her arm. He came to her side without hesitation and she pulled him in against her and pressed her lips to the top of his head. He tolerated this with the practiced resignation of a 6-year-old who had decided that maternal affection was acceptable within reasonable limits. Then he looked at Cole. Brown eyes, the same shade Cole had first seen in a hospital room in a sketchbook drawing of a man on a winter road in a parking lot where a boy had checked that he still knew his own name, his father's eyes looking out of his face. Are you staying? Jamie said. The question was simple. No subtext, no agenda. Just a child asking an adult a question that the adult had not yet formally answered in the direct way children ask things before they learned that directness was something to be managed. The room held it carefully, without pressure, giving it the space it needed. Cole looked at Jamie Parker. He thought about a winter highway and a decision made in the cold by a man he had never properly thanked. He thought about the debt he had carried for 6 years without knowing where to put it, and the way it had arrived home through a parking lot, through a hospital room, through a fence post, and a roof, and a confession in a garage, and a corkboard in a storage unit, all the way to here, to this kitchen, to this boy with his father's eyes asking the only question that had ever mattered. Yeah, Cole said, I'm staying. Jamie accepted this with the same completeness he accepted most things fully without reservation, as if it had always been the obvious answer, and the question had just been a formality. He went back to his sketchbook. He opened it on the kitchen table and picked up the blue crayon and bent over it with the focused intensity that was entirely his own. Cole looked at the unfinished drawing on the open page. A motorcycle on a highway, the rider leaning forward into the distance, the road ahead long and straight, and beside the rider, not behind, not following, but beside riding parallel, a second figure, smaller, arms slightly out the way a child balanced. A second motorcycle drawn with careful, earnest strokes that were better than they had been 2 months ago. The road ahead was long and went further than the drawing could contain. Jamie put the crayon to the page and kept going. Decker was gone by morning. He had turned in his cut the previous night, quietly leaving it folded on the workbench in the garage with the patches facing up. Strick found it when he came down at dawn. He stood looking at it for a moment, then set his coffee beside it and went upstairs to make more. Nobody said much about it. There wasn't much to say. A man who had been in the chapter for 7 years had made a choice that the chapter could not come back from, and the chapter responded the way it responded to things that were finished, by moving forward to what was in front of them. What was in front of them in the days that followed was the ordinary work of consequence. Gene filed a civil complaint with Diane's assistance that incorporated Wills's statement and the financial documents from Unit 14. It was not enough for criminal prosecution. The distance between what the documents showed and what could be proven in a criminal court was still too wide, and the man Crane had called had vanished into a network of transactions and intermediaries that would take years to untangle. But it was enough to put the right name in the right record. Enough to make Gerald Crane's name appear in an official document in the same sentence as Michael Parker's death. Enough that anyone who went looking would find it and understand what it meant. Wills cooperated with investigators in exchange for a negotiated arrangement. He was not a man Cole respected and would never be, but he was a man who, when the architecture of his situation had collapsed entirely, had chosen truth over the alternatives. That was worth acknowledging at precisely the level it deserved, no more and no less. The Nevada State Bar opened a formal investigation into Gerald Crane. His office, which had gone quiet the morning Diane filed, remained quiet. Gerald Crane, who had built a career on knowing where things were buried, had discovered that the thing he'd buried had been found by someone who wasn't looking for profit or leverage, but for something much simpler and therefore much harder to manage. Roy Briggs retained a new attorney. The new attorney, after reviewing the situation in its entirety, apparently advised Roy that further pursuit of the custody matter was not in his interest. Roy did not call Nora again after the voicemail she deleted. Whether this represented a genuine reckoning or simply a tactical retreat was impossible to know, and Nora did not spend energy trying to determine it. Some questions weren't worth what it cost to answer them. On a Thursday morning in late September, Diane called Nora to confirm that the custody motion had been formally withdrawn. Nora was at work when the call came. She stepped outside, stood in the parking lot in her pale green polo, with the name tag still pinned, and listened to Diane's voice telling her it was over. Then she thanked Diane, hung up, and stood in the parking lot for a moment looking at the Nevada sky, which was very blue and very large and completely indifferent to the specific weight that had just been lifted from a specific woman standing beneath it. Then she went back inside and finished her shift. Cole found out from Diane. He was in the garage when his flip phone rang, working on a transmission that actually needed work, this time his hands black to the wrist. He sat with the information for a moment after Diane hung up. Then he cleaned his hands, walked upstairs, knocked on Strick's door. Strick opened it. "It's over," Cole said. Strick looked at him for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I know." He opened the door wider. "Coffee's on." Cole came in and sat down and held the mug with both hands and said nothing for a while because nothing needed saying. The afternoon light came through Strick's window at the long September angle that meant the summer was finished, and somewhere across town on Carver Street, there was a boy drawing motorcycles and a woman finishing a shift, and the thing that had needed doing had gotten done. That was enough. The diner on Route 9 opened at 5:30 in the morning, which was how Hatch preferred it. He was already in the corner booth when the others arrived. Terrence Devlin, two others sliding into the vinyl seats with the easy weight of men who had been awake since before the world woke up. The waitress brought coffee without being asked because she knew them, and she had the warmth that came from years of feeding people at hours when feeding people was its own form of mercy. Cole arrived last. He came in from the cold, and the diner was warm and smelled like coffee and grease, and something that had no name, but that meant the same thing in every diner, in every small town, that people had been coming here for a long time and would keep coming. He looked at the men in the booth. They looked back. Hatch poured a cup across the table without a word. Cole sat. Nobody said much. That was fine. Strick came in at 6, still in his jacket. He sat beside Cole and wrapped both hands around a mug and looked at the table with the expression of a man who had put something down after carrying it a long time and was noticing what his hands felt like without it. Devlin said, "What about Decker?" The table was quiet. "He's gone," Strick said. "Turned in his cut." He said it without drama, without the weight of either judgment or absolution. "He'll be okay. He just had to go." Nobody argued with that. Hatch said the civil complaint. "Gene filed it," Cole said. "It won't bring Michael back." He stopped. "But it puts the right name in the right record." Hatch nodded slowly, the nod of a man for whom that distinction mattered, and always would. Terrence said, "The kid's okay." "Yeah," Cole said. "Good," Terrence said. And then he picked up his coffee and drank it because that was the whole thing, and further words would have only made it smaller than it was. The sun came up over Nevada the way the sun always came up over Nevada, slowly without apology, burning the dark off from the east in long, patient stripes of orange and gold that laid themselves across the flat desert like something being unrolled. The light came through the diner windows and fell across the table and across the men around it. Their worn jackets, their coffee mugs, their faces that had been through specific things, the kind of things that left specific marks that you learned to carry as part of the weight of being whoever you were. Cole held his coffee and looked at the light on the table. He thought about Route 93, February, 6 years ago. He had thought about it so many times since that the details had worn smooth like a stone, carried too long in a pocket. But sitting here with the morning coming in off the desert and coffee in his hands and men he trusted on all sides, he thought about it differently. Not as a debt, not as a weight he had been carrying without knowing where to set it down. As a gift that had been moving forward for 6 years without stopping, the way good things sometimes move quietly without needing to announce themselves arriving exactly when they were supposed to. He thought about a boy who drew motorcycles from memory and wrote dad maybe in careful first-grade handwriting because he was trying to hold the shape of a man he barely knew. He thought about what that man would have thought of all of this: the parking lot, the hospital room, the fence posts, the roof, the confession, the corkboard, the kitchen table where a boy had asked a man a simple question and received a simple answer. Cole thought Michael Parker would have understood it. He thought that was exactly the kind of thing Michael Parker would have understood without needing it explained. Outside on Route 9, a truck rolled past, heading toward the highway, its taillights fading in the direction of the horizon. A bird crossed the pale sky in a long, unhurried diagonal. The morning arrived the way mornings arrive, completely without condition, without interest in what had happened in the dark, just present and available and full of road. Strix set his mug down. "Good work," he said, not to anyone in particular. To the table, to the coffee, and the morning, and the men in the booth, and the specific ordinary miracle of a thing that had needed doing and had gotten done. Cole looked at the window. He looked at the highway beyond it, running east and west straight and long, and going further in both directions than the eye could follow. You passed it on, not as a transaction, not as a debt repaid. You passed it on the way Michael had given it, without announcement, without keeping score, simply because someone needed it, and you were there, and the stopping was available. You fixed the fence because it needed fixing. You stayed on the highway because the stranger was worth staying for. You came back because once you knew there was no version of yourself that didn't. The coffee was hot. The morning was cold. The highway ran in both directions as far as the light could follow. And somewhere on it 6 years ago, something had been given that had never stopped moving forward. Through a parking lot, through a hospital room, through a small house on Carver Street with a leaking roof and a fence that leaned and a boy who pressed hard with his colored pencils because he was his father's son, and his father had believed that nothing worth doing was worth doing halfway. Cole drank his coffee. Outside, the Nevada morning opened up wide and full of road, and the road, as it always did, went on.